Assalamu alaikum. We are studying e-commerce and I'm your instructor Saadat Nisar. If you recall, we were discussing firewalls in our previous lecture. I told you firewalls are combination of hardware and software. The firewalls, they sit between the network of an organization and the internet, and then they protect the internal network of the organization from outside attacks. So there are different types of firewalls. I told you that there are mainly three types. One is packet filter firewalls, then is the circuit level firewalls, and then the third type is the application gateway firewalls. The firewalls basically, they can examine the data packets which enter or which leave the network of the organization, and based upon certain rules they can filter the data packets, and in this fashion they protect the network. So I showed you a slide. You can see on the screen there is a firewall which sits between the internet and the internal network of an organization, and it can examine the data packets, and based upon certain rules then it can decide whether these data packets, they are to pass through this firewall and enter the organizational network or not. Let's have an overview of each type of firewall relatively in more detail. The first type, the packet filter firewall, which is the simplest type of firewall, it operates at the data link and network layers of the OSI model. Its basic job is that it determines as to whether the incoming or outgoing packets, they should be allowed to pass through the firewall or not. Normally, the IP addressing is taken as a rule to decide as to whether the data packet should pass through the firewall or not. So in case we want certain data packets which are being sent from some device, we don't want those packets from that particular device, from that particular IP address to enter into our network. By specifying that IP address, we can restrict, we can stop the entry of such data packets to pass through the firewall and to enter into our organization's network. Then the second type, the circuit level firewalls, they primarily do the same job as the packet filter firewalls do, but they operate at the transport layer, which brings a greater functionality to these firewalls. Remember one basic rule, that the higher is the layer of the OSI model where a firewall operates, the more sophisticated is that firewall. So since the circuit level firewall operates at the transport layer, which is higher in the OSI model comparatively, therefore it brings a greater functionality to this particular type of firewall. There are two jobs that this firewall can do basically. One is that it can look at the IP address of the packets which are being transmitted from an organization's network, and then it replaces the IP addresses on such packets which are leaving a network with its own IP address. In other words, the IP address on the data packets would be that of the circuit level firewall, and it would appear to a device outside the firewall that as if these packets, they are originating from this particular machine, this firewall. In this fashion, the information about the host machines on that organizational network, that information, that IP address would remain secret. Then another job that circuit level firewalls can do is that they can find out that whether a particular connection, it has been hijacked by a hacker and this connection is not appropriate, this is not a proper connection. If that is the case, if they determine that this is not the proper connection, in that eventuality a circuit level firewall would immediately cut off the connection and would not allow the hacker to pass through, to sneak past the firewall. Then the third type, the application gateway firewalls. Such firewalls operate at the application layer. So it means that they have the greatest, the maximum functionality. The application gateway firewalls, they authenticate the user by identifying that particular user who has attempted to create an HTTP or an FTP connection. So basically such firewalls, they filter out the HTTP or FTP requests, those requests which are transmitted through the application layer header. So in contrast to the packet filter firewalls, where the data packets themselves, they are filtered out by the firewall, in this application gateway firewalls, the actual HTTP or FTP requests, they are filtered out by the application gateway firewall. So wherever we want to block any outgoing FTP requests, then we can use this particular type of firewall, the application gateway firewalls. Similarly, where we want the employees of an organization not to access certain websites, we want to restrict their access to certain websites on the internet, then we can use application gateway firewall for that purpose. We can block their HTTP, their FTP requests for that matter. Then similarly, where we are afraid that there might be certain dangerous programs which can be downloaded by the host machines on the company's network from certain websites, again to stop that, we can again make use of this particular type of firewall, and as a result, those dangerous programs, they would not be downloaded, they would not disrupt the network. Then there is another type, the hybrid type of firewall, which is basically a combination of the other types of firewalls. So we can combine a circuit level firewall with the application gateway firewall, and then we can say that we have created a hybrid type of firewall in that manner. Then there is a term called proxy server, which I would like to refer to here in our today's lecture. A proxy server is a device, again, which sits between a trusted network like our own organizational network and the untrusted network, that is the internet. And it can do basically 3 jobs for us. In the slide, you can see I have shown you the setup of a proxy server. Here you see that there are a few client machines, in fact 4 client machines, and they are connected with the help of a hub, and then there is a server machine again connected to the hub, and here in this fashion we create a LAN, and then we connect this LAN to the proxy server, and that proxy server is then connected to the internet. In this way, we can say that the proxy server is residing between the LAN or network and the internet. The three main functions that a proxy server can do for us are, number one, the HTTP requests sent by the browser, they initially reach the proxy server, and then the proxy server affixes its own IP address on the request packets instead of the IP addresses of the host machines, and in this fashion it hides the IP addresses of the host machines by replacing those IP addresses with its own IP address, and then it downloads any web page which was requested, and after it downloads that web page, then it onwards supplies that web page to the host machine, to the client machine which had made that HTTP request. Number two, it can also act as a firewall, and where it acts as a firewall, it can then filter certain requests. It can filter the entry or the exit of data packets. Number three, it can do caching. Now, it may be a new term for you. Caching means that the proxy server can store web pages in its memory, and whenever a subsequent request for those web pages is made, then it can very quickly process such HTTP request, and it can then supply those web pages, retrieving those web pages from its cache memory. So we can say that because of caching, the proxy server can satisfy our HTTP requests very quickly. It can supply those web pages very quickly to the client machines instead of going to the actual web server. Rather, what it can do is it can retrieve those web pages from its hard disk and then supply it to the client machines. And in this fashion, we can say that the downloading period for the client is reduced considerably. Many ISPs, they are taking advantage of this caching concept very usefully, and it can earn a lot of revenue for them because they can provide a very quick, a very fast, efficient service to their customers, their clients, by quickly supplying them the requested web pages. Therefore, they can earn a good reputation, they can market themselves more effectively. Then it may not be out of place here to talk about some web server attacks. Web servers, like client machines, they are also susceptible to outside attacks. Basically, the programs which run on the web servers, they have the potential of damaging databases residing on the server sides. Plus, they can also abnormally terminate the web server software. They can change the information which is being kept on the web server. So, all these possibilities, they do exist, and they cause a threat to the security of the web server. These attacks, they come from within the server in the form of the programs, plus there can be outside attacks. The examples of web server attacks are like a buffer overflow type of attack, and then CGI scripts attacks. I don't think so we need to go into details here. So these are some of the web server threats, web server attacks that can be launched. There are a number of organizations which have been set up over the years to fight out these security threats. So in the year 1988, there was an organization which was formed with the help of certain research agencies and in collaboration with the US government, and it has worked very efficiently so far. I have a slide before you which shows its name. This is termed as Computer Emergency Response Team, abbreviated as CERT. And then 1 year later, in 1989, another organization was formed, which is called Systems Administrator Audit Network and Security Institute, SANS Institute. So both these organizations so far have functioned very efficiently. Their basic job is to provide a communication infrastructure to the security experts and enable them to exchange their information, to exchange their expertise, so that the job of reducing the security threats to the networks, that can be reduced. There are other organizations also, but these two I felt more prominent in this regard, so I included this information here. Then there is a concept, virtual private network. I think in a previous lecture I have touched this concept very briefly, so today we can discuss it in relatively more detail. A virtual private network is a tool for remote access. So before I discuss that, it's important that we first gather the concept, what is remote access. Assume that you are a small branch network of an organization and your corporate, your head office network exists at a remote location, and you want to become a part of that corporate, that head office network. You want to avail the resources which are available on that corporate network. One option for you is, in this regard, that you set up a dial-up connection with the help of a telephone line. You set up a dial-up connection with a machine, with a server sitting on that corporate network. And in this way, through this telephone line, you get a connection with that corporate network, and then you avail those resources available there. In this particular case, where you use the telephone line to become a part of the bigger network, you have to configure both the server on the corporate network and the client machine, which is on the smaller, the branch network. So to configure that, there are options available. So in case of the server machine, if we are using Windows 2000 server, then there is a special facility using which we can configure the server on the corporate network, and we can then specify that the username, the passwords, they have to be used to authenticate the user and to allow the access to this bigger network. Similarly, on the client side also, the Windows operating system, they provide this facility, this option. They provide a connection wizard using which we can configure the client machine also, and we can then specify that this is the telephone number of that remote server. That remote server is termed as RAS, or remote access server. The client is termed as remote access client. So with the help of the telephone line, then after configuring both the remote access server and the remote access client, we can then establish a connection. What happens is that once you have configured both these machines, the server machine and the client machine, then after configuration, the client can enter a correct password. Then the client can press a dial button. After that, a connection would be created and the telephone number of the remote access server would be dialed up, and the connection can be created with the remote access server, provided the password is correct and the user has been given the sanction to avail the resources available on that corporate network. The protocol which is used in this type of connection is point-to-point protocol, or abbreviated as PPP. Using this point-to-point protocol, the host sitting on a branch network can be connected, can become a part of the bigger corporate network, and then the exchange of information, the exchange of data can take place between the two machines. Then the virtual private network, it provides us another option of remote access. So where we do not want the special telephone, the dedicated telephone line to be used for remote access, we can have an alternative. We can use then virtual private network. Remember, a virtual private network is defined to be a secured, a dedicated point-to-point connection over the internet. The basic thing that you need to know, you need to register here, is that in case of virtual private network, we make use of the internet infrastructure for connection purposes. Okay, that means that the remote access server, which will in this case be called a tunnel server, that would be connected with the internet. Similarly, the remote access client, here it can be called as the tunnel client. The tunnel client would also be connected with the internet, and using the internet infrastructure, the routers, etc., then both the networks, the branch network and the bigger corporate network, they would become connected with each other. The branch office would become a part of the bigger network using VPN. Again, we have to configure both the tunnel server and the tunnel client to establish a virtual private network connection. So in case of a tunnel client, there is an option. We go to the internet options, then there is an option connections. We utilize that option, we click there, and then we can enable the virtual private network option there. So we take these different steps in order to configure our tunnel client, and we also specify, while configuring, we specify the IP address of the tunnel server. Here we are not using the telephone dial-up connection. We are not using as such the telephone number of the remote access server. Rather, we shall have to provide the IP address of the tunnel server to which we want to be connected. Similarly, the tunnel server would be configured accordingly. So it should be configured such that it can receive the user username, the user password, and it can then verify the identity of the user, whether this user has to be given access to the network or not. So after this configuration on both the sides is done, then with the help of a protocol called point-to-point tunneling protocol, PPTP, which is an encryption-based protocol, which means that all the information travels in the form of an encrypted data. Then with the help of this PPTP, then the exchange of information between the tunnel client and the tunnel server, that can take place. The tunnel client can become a part of the corporate network with the help of this concept. The role of network administrator is quite important, quite relevant in this behalf. The network administrator is a person, is an individual who can make certain policy decisions, who can decide as to what would be the type of connection, what would be the connection time, and what would be the amount of data that can be exchanged. So these decisions can be made by the network administrator on the server side. Then one important thing you must register here is that the virtual private network connections, or in other words tunnels, they are very cost effective. They are, in other words, cost reducing measures for remote access if we compare them with the option where we use the telephone lines, the special telephone line for connection purposes for remote access. We can say that a virtual private network is very cheap. I can give you an example. In case of virtual private network, what we have to do basically is that we make a local telephone call to the ISP, right? So we make a local call to the ISP, we just incur the cost of that local call, and then with the help of the infrastructure provided by the ISP, the routers, the other hardware arranged by the ISP, then we become a part of the corporate network. So for hours we can become a part of that bigger corporate network using the ISP's infrastructure, using the internet, and we shall just be incurring the cost of a local call. So therefore VPN is cost saving measure. On the other hand, if we go for a special telephone line for remote access, then we first of all need to have a dedicated special telephone line. We have to incur the cost of maintaining that telephone line, and then whenever we want to become a part of the bigger corporate network, then for the time we are a part of that network, we'll be incurring the cost of a long distance call. So in case we want to be a part of the bigger corporate network for 5 hours, then the cost of a long distance call for 5 hours would have to be charged, and then it becomes very expensive for us. So therefore we can here understand that virtual private network presents us with a very cheap option, relatively cheap option, and we can make use of this concept to avail of the resources which are lying on the other network, the bigger network, and yet we cannot incur much cost. Then you remember I told you perhaps in a previous lecture that virtual private network is an example of an extranet. Every extranet would not be a virtual private network, but every virtual private network would be an extranet. You know that extranet means that when we connect different intranets with each other, we can say that we have in fact constituted an extranet, right? So VPN is the example of an extranet. With the help of VPN, we can become the part of the network of our suppliers, of our distributors. If we are doing our online business and we are manufacturing certain end products, we are creating certain products for which we require some raw material, we can be connected to the suppliers of that raw material effectively using this concept VPN. Similarly, for distribution of our products also, we can become connected to the network of our distributors with the help of virtual private network. So that was mainly about the virtual private network. I hope that you have now developed a fair degree of understanding about VPN. Then I want to start here our new major topic, which is cryptography. I told you that today security presents the biggest threat to electronic commerce. So one of the major reasons that the hype which was associated with e-commerce that could not turn into reality, the major reason for that was security. People, they are extremely shy of providing their sensitive information, particularly their financial information, their credit card number on the internet, because they have this fear in their mind that thousands of people can view that credit card number and then they can misuse that, causing a financial loss, financial damage to the users. So one of the main solutions that the experts have so far come up with to tackle this problem of security is cryptography. In simple words, cryptography means the technique, the science using which we can convert our simple plain information into an unintelligible form, or in a form which cannot be understood. So therefore, even if somebody intercepts that information, that person would still not be able to make any sense out of it, because we have applied cryptography, we have encrypted the message, we have encrypted the information, we have converted it into a form that cannot be understood by a person. Cryptography has a long history. It has existed maybe thousands of years ago. In his book, The Code Breakers, a famous author, David Cahan, he writes that the roots of cryptography can be traced to ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. So there is a recorded history that where the Greek generals, they wanted to send certain confidential, certain important messages to their commanders in the field. They were using cryptography there. They were sending such messages in a coded form. Therefore, even if the messenger was intercepted, still the information that was being passed over, that information could not be understood, that information could not be revealed, because it was encrypted, it was in a coded format. Cryptography basically uses two different techniques. One is substitution and the other is transposition. In case of substitution, the letters, the individual letters in a message, they are encrypted with some other letters. For instance, if there is a letter A used in a message, we can develop a substitution scheme that wherever this letter A is appearing in the message, it should be substituted by the letter B. Similarly, the letter B in the message should be substituted by the letter E, and so on. So in this fashion, by substituting various letters, we can convert the message, we can convert the information into a format which cannot be understood, even if this information is intercepted by somebody. So there are different substitution schemes. one scheme is that instead of substituting every letter always into some unique letter, some other letter, we can substitute that letter in different ways. So A on certain positions in the message may be substituted by D, but on certain other positions A may be substituted by F. So we can develop such a substitution scheme also by rotating the pattern of substitution in this way. In the second technique called transposition, we can scramble different characters used in the message. One example of a transposition scheme is that where we write a message in the form of a table, row by row, and then we read this information column by column and then rewrite it. Once we do that, automatically our message, our information would be scrambled. I can illustrate this concept with the help of the slide before you. Here you see I'm writing two sentences. I will not come today, tell the boss. And these two sentences I write in the form of a table, row by row. So you can see in the table below, first comes I, then will, then not, then come, today, then full stop, then tell the boss. So in this fashion, row by row, I have written my sentences. Using transposition scheme, now I can scramble this information, I can encrypt this information. So you can see after the arrow, I have written the scrambled information. First I, then N, then M, A, L, B, W, O, E, Y, L, O, I, T, T, full stop, so on. You can notice this thing that these characters which I just recited, these characters, I have picked up from the columns. So in the first column of the table you saw I, N, M, A, L, B. So that first column has been reproduced in the scrambled message. So you saw I, N, M, A, L, P, so on. So I believe that this simple example should be enough for you to understand this concept of transposition. In the early 20th century, there were many electromechanical devices which were invented, using which the encrypted, the coded messages could be sent to different persons with the help of telegraphs or radio. So these devices, they have been quite in vogue in the Europe, in the United States, in the early part of the 20th century. Then in our today's time, the speedy digital computers, they have now appeared, and there are sophisticated cryptographic algorithms which have been developed which can run on these computers, and they use different combinations of substitution, transposition, or different mathematical functions to produce different coded encrypted messages. Cryptography is a dual use technology, which means that cryptography can be used both for civilian as well as for military purposes. Its military use has been recorded in the history, and this is quite popularly known. Julius Caesar, he used to communicate with his military people, with his military men in the field with the help of these coded messages. Then Mary the Queen of Scots, when she was trying to overthrow the British crown, she used to interact with her ADs with the help of encrypted, coded messages. Then a very famous common example is that of Hitler. Hitler, during the Second World War, developed a code called the Enigma encryption cipher. And using that Enigma cipher, he could send the encrypted messages to the German army and to the U-boats during the Second World War, and that played a very vital role initially in the success of Hitler during the Second World War. For civilian purposes, again, the history shows that cryptography has been used to hide certain religious secrets, certain secrets related to science, industry, business, commerce, etc. During the period of Queen Victoria in England, there was a trend that people used to advertise certain personalized information, certain personalized messages in the newspapers of London, and they used to apply cryptography for that purpose. In our present time, the use of cryptography in the case of business and commerce has surpassed any of its use in the earlier days. So therefore, cryptography, we can say, has played a very vital, a very important role in the commercialization of the internet. And today, one can say that without cryptography, the individuals, the banks, the companies, organizations, they would not be comfortable doing transactions on the internet. They would prefer that there should be proper use of cryptography wherever the transactions are being carried out online. On the screen, you can find a relatively more rigid definition of the term cryptography. You can see on the slide, cryptography is a collection of mathematical techniques to ensure confidentiality of information. Then there are two terms, encryption and decryption. The process of scrambling a message with the help of a key is called encryption. So wherever we use a cryptographic key and we apply that cryptographic key on a message, the message gets scrambled. In other words, it gets converted into a form which is not understandable, and we say that encryption has taken place. The reverse of encryption is decryption. So the process of unscrambling a message using an appropriate key is called decryption. So if a message is scrambled, we can apply an appropriate, a suitable key to convert it into an understandable form, and that process is called decryption. Then the word keys. Keys are defined as numbers or characters that are randomly generated. So the keys would be numbers, characters, or they may be a combination of numbers, characters, or certain special characters which would be generated by a cryptographic algorithm according to its code, and then these keys can be applied for encryption and decryption purposes. There are two main types of cryptography, namely symmetric cryptography and asymmetric cryptography. In case of symmetric cryptography, same keys are used for encryption and decryption purposes. So the key which is used to encrypt the data, the same key would be required to decrypt that data or that information in case of symmetric cryptography. In contrast, in case of asymmetric cryptography, we use a pair of keys, that is a public key and a corresponding private key for encryption and decryption purposes. This is also called public key cryptography. Accordingly, whatever information we encrypt with the help of a public key, using the corresponding private key alone, we can decrypt that information which was encrypted with the public key. That is in case of asymmetric cryptography. Then there is a term PGP, pretty good privacy. Pretty good privacy is the name of a very popular cryptographic system which was developed somewhere in 1991 by a German called Phil Zimmermann. And this system is available for general public use, and we can make use of this cryptographic system for applying cryptography. This system again utilizes both the symmetric and asymmetric type of cryptography, and it can generate the keys for us, and by using those keys we can then do the encryption and decryption. Next, there is the term digital signature, also called electronic signature, which I would like to highlight here. An electronic signature can simply be defined as a symbol, a number, a character, or a combination thereof, which can be applied to an electronic document. So in the slide, you can read the definition of electronic signature. An electronic signature means any letters, numbers, symbols, images, characters, or any combination thereof in electronic form applied to an electronic document. Remember that we can execute our digital signature with the help of a unique private key. An electronic signature has three main characteristics or three main properties. Wherever we use an electronic signature, it should satisfy three different properties. Number one, it should bring authenticity, which means that with the help of an electronic signature, we should be able to trace or track that individual or that source from where a particular message has been received. So any letter, any symbol, any number, any character or a combination thereof, which allows us, which provides us this facility of tracking the source, we can say then that symbol, that character, that letter, as the case may be, it may be called as an electronic signature. The second characteristic of an electronic signature is integrity, which means that with the help of an electronic signature, we can identify, we can figure out as to whether there was any alteration or modification in the message during its transmission or not. So with the help of electronic signature, we can then verify that this information is intact, it was not verified, it was not modified, it was not altered during the transmission. Then the third feature, the third characteristic of an electronic signature is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation simply means that whose signatures these are purported to be, he cannot deny that they do not belong to him. In fact, non-repudiation is a consequence of authenticity and integrity. Once authenticity and integrity is established, it would be extremely difficult for a person to say that these electronic signatures, they do not belong to such individual. Electronic signature technology makes use of asymmetric type of cryptography or the public key cryptography, and with the help of a detailed example, we shall be able to see how this technology works. In our today's lecture, what we have basically done is that we have studied the concept of firewalls, the different types of firewalls, the concept of proxy server, the idea about the virtual private network, how a virtual private network works, and how it is cost effective for us. And then we have also started our new main topic, the cryptography, and we shall continue with this topic. For the time being, we have to conclude here because the time for our today's lecture is over. And with this, I say Allah Hafiz to you.